I have so many relatives that live inside Iran, people who come from uh, very religious conservative families who their parents, their uncles are supporters of this regime. And you have all of these people who are so aware, who are so informed. They're not fooled anymore. There's no question about the fact that the overwhelming majority of Iranians are against this regime. It's just we don't really know the figures. We can't really. I mean, I'm not the type to put a date on when this will happen or when that will happen, but I am very optimistic about the future because of what I see among the young generation of Iranians, especially those under the age of 30.
This is a special edition of Roqe, episode 286, The Uprising 1 year later. Let's go to here in Toronto now. And an Iranian Canadian engineer and YouTuber who has been incredibly persistent and eloquent in his posts and his activism for the uprising over the last year, Bahador Alast. His YouTube channel focusing on languages and culture has grown to be one of the most popular channels in the world with millions of views. Right now, Bahador Alast joins me from Toronto. Hello, Bahador John.
Hi, Jian. Happy to be with you.
Thanks so much for doing this. I mean, you are a very thoughtful guy who approaches these issues with nuance and facts. So let me ask you from the outset, as I've been asking everybody, what are you feeling 1 year later, and what lessons do you think we have learned as a global Iranian community in the year after the killing of Mahsa Amini?
Uh, well, I would say we've learned quite a lot, uh, not just about each other, the circumstances of what we're facing, but also as far as how the world affairs operate. You know, I would say the biggest lesson that we should take away from this is in this battle, we really only have each other. And that's not to take away from the genuine support of many non-Iranian individuals, because there are so many of them, and I greatly appreciate that, including many of my own friends. But when it comes to governments, when it comes to politicians, when it comes to organizations, we can't depend on anybody. Nobody's out there to help us, and we have to understand this. We have to realize this. We only have each other in this fight. So, the more united we are, the more we stick together and we focus on that common goal, which is to get rid of the Islamic Republic regime, the stronger we will be. And I think that is, for me and for many Iranians, that's one of the biggest lessons.
We being alone as a community, as you said, or not being able to depend on anybody, any institutions, any governments, is how I started the show, actually. And I wonder if you think, I mean, it seems like we should know this after years, decades, centuries. Do you think we were somehow naive, and that is those of us in the diaspora going into this year and seeing this level of activism around the world and inside Iran, that things would somehow be different in terms of the support we would receive from the superpowers, et cetera?
I think many of us, myself included, believe that if we can convince uh, global powers, Western governments, political parties, that our battle and our fight will benefit them, then they will side with us. And I think that is, even though many of us accepted the fact that they don't really care about us or what we're fighting for, but if we can convince them, then maybe they will side with us and maybe they will help us. But when you think about these situations from a political, very selfish point of view, from their eyes, what benefit do they gain? What do they gain? I mean, the regime in Iran is a threat to the Iranian people, and many people across the Middle East. But they're really not a threat to the Western world, to a political party in Germany, for instance. They actually benefit from this regime being in power. And a lot of people will disagree with me on that. But why would they care? And I mean, thinking about this from a very selfish and not caring about human rights, not caring about the people. This is how a lot of politicians will look at it. This is how a lot of political parties and governments will look at the
I guess
situation.
it's a little twee to say, what do they gain? They gain the ability to sleep at night, knowing that they've helped human rights around the world.
Yeah, I think this sounds horrible, but I think most politicians actually don't care. They really don't care. I mean, they use the term human rights just because it sounds nice. It makes them look better, and a lot of times it's helpful for gaining support and becoming popular. But really, in reality, they don't actually care. So that's why I say we have to understand that we really only have each other, and the greatest weapon we have against the Islamic Republic is our unity. And you can sense that whenever we are united, whenever we are together, regardless of our political differences or whatever differences we have, the stronger we are, and the more afraid the regime is. But when we are fighting among each other, when we are not united, when we're not focusing on what the ultimate goal is, that's when we become weaker. And unfortunately, that if it stays like that, then it's going to be very, very difficult to topple this regime.
And what have you learned about that unity over this past year?
Well, for one, I think that we've seen many of the mercenaries of this regime actually infiltrate social media and different places and try to create differences between people, get them to fight among each other, people who should be united, right? So that's definitely one thing to always keep in mind, to realize that this is the goal of the regime, to turn us against each other. So we can't let them do that. I would say I look at my own political views and what I ultimately see and envision for the future in Iran. And it might be very different from what somebody else who's also a staunch, enemy of the Islamic Republic. But, we have differences, but we have to focus on what our mission is. I would spend less time fighting with that person and trying to convince them that my vision is correct for the future, and I would focus my energy on doing what I can to expose this regime and to do what I can to be the voice of the people inside the country, be the voice of Iranian people who are fighting and putting their lives on the line to get rid of this regime, and doing whatever I can to reach that goal, rather than trying to convince somebody else who's an opponent of the Islamic Republic that, hey, listen, what you're saying here or whatever, your political affiliation is not really right, and I'm going to start fighting and arguing with you. I don't think that's...
But you did fight against those who, or you were speaking out against those who you believed or you believe were and are enabling the regime. I mean, it wasn't just governments and corporations. You've been very outspoken about reformist lobby groups in the West that you felt have enabled and effectively served to support the Iranian regime.
Of course, because
there was an effort. There was an effort to really move past that kind of reformism, and yet, Bahador, it seems like we're on. If we look at things now realistically and honestly, we're on the precipice of a new nuclear deal with the U.S. and Iran. Those same lobby voices seem to be as loud as ever, say in America. Do you believe much has changed?
No, the reason I fought against those voices and those groups and those organizations is because their goal is not to get rid of the Islamic Republic regime. That's not their ultimate goal. They talk about reform. They talk about changing things. They talk about, oh, if we just change a few discriminatory laws within the system, everything will be great. This is what they envision. This is what they fight for. So they don't have the same goal. What I'm saying about the fighting between people is people who ultimately want to get rid of this regime, and they just happen to have certain political differences. I mean, we have that everywhere in the world. Right here in Canada, like about certain policies we may disagree with, but that doesn't mean that we're against one another, right? So that's what I'm referring to, and I think that those groups and those organizations who lobby on behalf of the regime in the United States and Canada and some of them in Europe, some of them probably don't really have a position. They are just after their own interests. They're after money. They're after whatever benefits them, right? So their goal isn't necessarily to get rid of the regime, but it's also not necessarily to keep the regime in power, with some exceptions. Some of them are very much affiliated with that regime, but some of them will just switch sides whenever it suits them, right? So I don't think those groups or those individuals are our allies. Like we have to stick together as people, as true opponents of the Islamic Republic.
final question to you, a general one, like the general one I started with that I've been asking everybody. If you were to put on your crystal ball, or how do you feel about the state of things inside in Iran and the fight for democracy and freedom in Iran compared to how you felt, say, this time last year, right before the uprising? And are you optimistic about the weeks and months ahead?
I'm definitely optimistic about the future. I'm not going to put a certain date on it, but I'm very optimistic about the future. And I say that because uh, to me, the people of Iran are what dictate the future. And what we see right now with this young generation of Iranians is something that I personally, even myself, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I didn't even think about it this way. I didn't envision this. I have so many relatives that live inside Iran, people who come from uh, very religious conservative families who their parents, their uncles are supporters of this regime. And you have all of these people who are so aware, who are so informed. They're not fooled anymore. There's no question about the fact that the overwhelming majority of Iranians are against this regime. It's just we don't really know the figures. We can't really. I mean, I'm not the type to put a date on when this will happen or when that will happen, but I am very optimistic about the future because of what I see among the young generation of Iranians, especially those under the age of 30.
It's always good to talk to you. Thanks for being part of this special, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me, and same, wish you all the best and Omid Piruzi.
Merci. Khodafis.